Hello guys and welcome back to Planet 40k. In this video we're going to be going through all of the secondary objectives within the Arks of Omen chapter approved book. Now we have recently gone over some of the secondary objectives specifically for the Necron ones that are in the codex, and they've of course been updated and nerfed as well. In fact I did miss one of the nerfs with the Purge the Vermin option. We'll go over that later in this video. But for now let's just jump straight into it, starting off with the Purge the Enemy options. So the first category of the secondary objectives is Purge the Enemy, and the first one within the category is Assassination. So this is virtually the same as the Nephilim book, except if you remove a character using your troops, then you're going to gain a CP. Very situational that you're going to be doing that, but it is doable. Now ideally you need to be going up against 4 characters to be able to get 13 points, because of course that's 3 points per character and 1 for the Warlord, and of course 5 will max out your actual secondary objective. Sometimes when you're playing a Strike Force game that isn't going to be achievable, and in incursion games, even less likely, is very dependent on what your opponent actually brings. Now ways to score Assassination, well first of all want to bring in the Catan shards, but the Catan powers in particular, because you can target characters directly with some of those Catan powers. Also in particular, the Nightbringer is our best killer unit, in fact in the Necron Codex. He ignores virtually all of the saving throws in melee. So that's one way of dealing with those characters. Another way in melee would be the Scorpion Destroyers. They're of course a very strong melee outlet and throw a lot of damage out. Now in terms of range capabilities, I would look at the death marks because they're now only 13 points a model, which means for 130 points you're going to be getting 10 death marks, which on average will do between 4 and 5 wounds to a toughness 4 character, and that does include the 6s that inflict mortal wounds. Now none of those options are really an auto include by any stretch, so this secondary will need to be selected while making your list to get the best results. Next within the Purge the Enemy list is Bring It Down. Now this is unchanged from the Nephilim book, obviously not that good against infantry heavy factions, so this will be quite difficult to pre-plan for some of those factions. Great against Knights or Astra Militarum for example, who really rely on their vehicles. Tyranids and Demons you may get away with as they tend to bring those big monsters, but they do have options of going Horde. Now ways to score Bring It Down, for me you're looking at the Locust Heavy Destroyers or the Doom Scythes. They've got great damage output at range, and there's no crappy d6 damage with those either. And in melee, again you're looking at the same options that we looked at within the Assassination secondary, the Scorpion Destroyers or the Nightbringer, but you can also add the Void Dragon, who will deal additional damage to those vehicles in particular. So that's all the Purge the Enemy options. We've of course lost Code of Combat since the Nephilim book, but at the end of the video I'm going to pick my best of each category, and maybe I'm going to select a generic 3 that I would take to a game. Okay, the next batch of secondary objectives is the No Mercy, No Respite list, and the first one within the list is Grind Them Down. Now this is also unchanged from the Nephilim book, except again you get to score an extra command point by killing a unit with one of our troop options. Now this one's more doable, gaining a CP than Assassination was, because it's now any unit as opposed to a character unit, which likely has the Lookout Sir ability, and of course our only troop options are Necron Warriors and Immortals that are shooty units. Now the problem with this one still exists, which is a lot of the time you need to hold yourself back from killing units. For example, if you go second and you know you just need to kill 2 units to score Grind Them Down for that battle round, you kill those 2 units, but you've still got maybe plenty of more units to shoot and fight with, and now you need to decide on whether you want to make it harder for yourself to score this objective in later battle rounds by killing more now, or you're going to leave those units for the later battle rounds, but of course you're not removing enemy units now. Now you can just optionally whittle those units down, but you need to think carefully about how you declare your weapons, and for me personally, split firing sometimes does backfire. So let's grind them down. Let's get on to the next one, which is No Prisoners. Another one that's been unchanged from the Nephilim book. Ideally you want to be going up against a lot of bodies to successfully score with this secondary. This one's a total opposite to Bring It Down, so never pair them. Not useful against low model count armies such as Custodians or Grey Knights. Their models do have a nice amount of wounds, but there's not that many of them. Going up against Hordes is a pretty decent option, or even a mirror match against other Necron factions, because their models come back, they get replenished with the reanimation protocols, as you probably do know by now. Now other factions can also replenish models such as the Death Guard or Tyranids, to name a few, but it's not always the case. First of all, it's easier in a larger game size. There's obviously going to be more models. If you've got a 2,000 point game, there's going to be a lot more models than a 1,000 point game, so more opportunities to get rid of models in the game. Now before selecting secondary objectives, simply count up the total wounds that your opponent has from the non-vehicles, non-characters and non-monster units, and see if it's worth it. 100 wounds is going to score you 12 points, because of course 100 divided by 10 is 10, and you get 2 points for having 100 or more in the tally, and that is probably a good aim to achieve. Now you could possibly get more than that, but any less you need to possibly consider other options and come back to this as a backup. Another option within the No Mercy, No Respite category is the Treasures of Aeons. This is one of our Necron specific ones from our codex, and of course it has now been nerfed. We used to previously score 5 as a maximum per turn, we can now only get 4. Now it is scored at the end of the turn, so you don't always need to be resilient to score, but it will of course help in the following command phase with your primaries if you do manage to hold on to those set objectives. Now ways to score this one: first of all, objective secured dynasties, the Nihilak dynasty, or even Eternal Conquerors, which you now can't pair anymore with one of the other custom codes within the codex. Fast cheap units such as Canoptic Scarabs or even Tomb Blades to steal objectives on the cheap. Ghost Arks with Necron Warriors are very useful if you want to stick around till the next command phase to score those primaries. Now this method is more ideal as both Warriors and the Ghost Arks have become more cheaper now. 11 points per warrior when they used to be 13, and 115 points for the Ghost Ark. That actually means for 225 points you're getting a Necron Ghost Ark and 10 warriors within it. In fact, you don't even need to deploy Necron warriors inside the Ghost Ark. You could simply take one of your infantry characters that are already within your list and deploy that character within the Ghost Ark and then jump it out in turn 1. And then just use the Ghost Ark alone with objectives secured, 14 wounds, quantum shielding. That's either going to swallow up your opponent's attacks or score you Treasure of Aeons and your primaries on your next turn. I still think it's one of our best options available to us, as we do score within our own turn. It's just going to take a little bit longer to max this one out. On to the next category, which is Warpcraft, and we've only got one option here because we are not Psychers, and we've got Abba the Witch. So this is unchanged from the Necron book. Now this is situational. It does compete highly with the assassination secondary objectives that we spoke about earlier, but you can also pair with it too, because a lot of the Psychers are characters, so that will pair very nicely. Now you need 5 Psyker characters to max this secondary out, which isn't that likely. Now you do have the option of going up against Psyker units such as Horrors from the Demon Codex or Zoanthropes from the Tyranny Codex perhaps. They can add to your scoring. Now ways to score this one: we come to the same ideas that we spoke about: the Assassination, the Death Marks, the Nightbringer, Scorbit Destroyers. Also anti-Psyker units are going to assist you in this battle, such as the Silent King, Illuminazares, Canoptic Spiders with the Gloom Prisms, and also using the Zerican Dynasty to ignore mortal wounds on a 5+. Now this isn't going to score you the secondary points, but it at least will assist you within the game against a psychic faction. On to the next category, which is Battlefield Supremacy, and the first one is behind enemy lines. Now this one has been buffed in this chapter approved book. 1 unit behind enemy lines scores 3 VP rather than 2, and we also gain a command point if we're using troops to do so. So ways to score behind enemy lines: well, there's quite a lot of ways in fact. First of all, I'm going to go back to those Ghost Arks again with Necron Warriors. Those Ghost Arks are moving 12 inches, so you can be gaining extra CP along the way there. You've got the Veil of Darkness Relic as another option. Again, you could send troops over to gain some CP. The Nephric Dynasty stratagem allows us to deep strike units if needed, or the now cheaper Monolith can zip units across the battlefield as an alternative option. But the main method for me is using units that have got the inbuilt deep strike, such as Hexmark Destroyers with a Plasma Sight of course. That'll be 2 units there. Flayed ones, possibly even Death Marks too. Now this objective is great as it doesn't have any restrictions on unit size or being a certain distance away from other areas, which you're going to see in fact in the next entry. But I do think this is going to become one of our better options for Necrons within Arks of Omen. Right, on to the next one, which is Engage on All Fronts. Now it has received a slight buff with the distances between table quarters. Now if you're going for all 4 table quarters, then it's only a 3-inch distance between the other quarters rather than a 6. But if you are going for 3 quarters, it's still going to be that 6-inch buffer. So this is going to help massively in incursion games in particular, because that's where I tend to struggle with this secondary objective, because the board size is just way too small. So little tips in scoring Engage on All Fronts. First of all, before the game begins, you need to look at the locations of your primary objectives, as that's likely where your units are going to be heading, because of course that's the main aim of the game. You want to be maxing out that with 45 points. So you need to ask yourself, do these locations marry up to where I want my units to score Engage on All Fronts? A lot of the time the answer will be yes, but bear in mind your unit needs to be wholly within the quarter and not within 6 inches or 3 inches, depending on what you're going for, of the other quarters. So look for potential pitfalls pre-game. Also look at your opponent's army and then ask, who's likely to dominate the board in this matchup? If your answer is your opponent, then this is a red flag. You're not likely going to be scoring an Engage on All Fronts. I mean, maybe you can score some early points, but the likelihood is you will get tabled. Thankfully you don't require objective secured or anything like that to score Engage on All Fronts, but if you can't get to certain locations, then it's probably not going to be worth it. Okay, next we come on to Purge the Vermin, which is another Necron specific one. Unfortunately you can't be scoring this on turn 1, so that's likely an instant 3 points that we would have gained in the Nephilim book that we can't gain now. Now something I didn't spot in my previous video, apologies for that, it was some of you guys in the comments actually alerted me to this huge nerf. So enemy units no longer need to be wholly within a table quarter to deny us points, which is I think outrageous. They literally could have one single unit in the centre of the battlefield, and that's going to be counting as all 4 quarters, and potentially it could even include our deployment zone in certain missions too. Now unfortunately, unless this gets patched, this is just not pickable at the moment, and apologies to the viewers on the previous video as it wasn't picked up on. We got slapped pretty hard by GW on that one. Now if you were to still go for this one, good luck to you, but ways to score this one, you need to defend your quarters with screens, Canoptic Scarabs in particular, and it's obviously much easier against non-flying units because you can literally hold them down in a certain position, and also just pick off individual enemy units that are there to deny us points in quarters. If there's just one unit in one single quarter, that is a unit to pick off because that is 1 point. Right, let's get out of the Purge the Vermin because I'm a bit disgusted with that one to be honest with you. And we're going to move into Shadow Operations, and the first one is Raise the Banners High. Now this one is unchanged, and I quite like Raise the Banners to be honest with you. I've had quite a bit of success with it. Now it is restricted to infantry only of course, and it's kind of a nerf in a way because we don't really use Necron Immortals anymore the way we used to, because we don't need to pay that troops tax with this new Arks of Omen detachment. Now ways to still score it, well units such as Cryptothralls, they're worth throwing away for an action. Lich Guard with the swords and shields because they're likely going to be camping. Also don't forget we can use that Protocol of Sunstorm so we can do actions and still fire. So any units that can be doing that at range, Locust Heavy Destroyers, Locust Destroyers, Necron Warriors, all those kind of units can still raise the banners as they are infantry. Now in fact you could get your 10 Necron Warriors and just throw away their range attacks for a single turn and just do the action instead. You're not losing that much, and they may not even be within range of their Gorse Reapers anyway. Now this is going to work pretty good with objective secured dynasties again. It makes the banners harder to remove from play, and remember you can actually support the banners with non-infantry units such as a Ghost Ark after the banner has been put up, because it's only when you actually lose the objective that the banner will fall. Okay, on to another one in Shadow Operations. We've got Retrieve Battlefield Data, so they've changed the name yet again. This one is unchanged however in terms of the actual rules of the secondary. I think it's now become a worthy option because Ancient Machineries was also nerfed, and we're going to get onto that one in the next entry. But as for RBD, it's quite easy to score because it happens all within your own turn, and it's better used on units of 6. The ones that aren't troops anyway, because you're going to guarantee that you do the actual action. Now ways to score this one. Tomb Blades are now dirt cheap at 18 points a bike. Grab a couple of units of 6, that's 180 points per unit. Put them in strategic reserves for free because that's a new thing now in the Arks of Omen book, and pop them out 1 unit at a time to complete the action in the other 2 quarters. Now as for your home quarters, well infantry models are better for the 2 home quarters, so you could either save it for melee units that aren't going to make a charge that turn, but make sure you do one of them in turn 1, otherwise it will come back and bite you. Now you're not going to be able to max out this one with 15 victory points, but 12 is pretty good and it's not that difficult. Okay, on to another one of our Necron options, which is Ancient Machineries. Of course this has been slapped as well, it's got a nerf with core vehicles can no longer do this action, so pack away your Annihilation barges because they are not doing the action anymore, but thankfully the Canoptic units can still work on it. Now it does go quite nicely with Treasures of Aeons, as often it's the same 3 objectives on the battlefield, and of course it's going to go hand in hand with scoring primaries. Now ways to score this, I'm going to go with Tomb Blades again because they're the cheap option. Canoptic Scarabs are of course even cheaper. Just be careful particularly in incursion games where there's actually 2 objectives within your own deployment zone, because the likelihood is there's only going to be 1 in the no man's land area, which actually makes the rest of the Ancient Machineries objectives much harder to achieve because you've got to get your units all the way to the other side of the battlefield and then do that action. Again, make use of that free strategic reserves because you're going to need to protect those cheap units so you can bring them directly out into the right area for the action. And again, it's going to work well with objectives secured to have it all done within your own turn. You don't want to be waiting until your next command phase because it can get quite messy for cheap action units. It was much better when it was at Ghost Ark doing the action, wasn't it? Okay, so that's all the secondary objectives covered. Now I'm going to pick my favourite one from each of the categories, and then I'm going to narrow it down to a generic 3 if I was just taking a generic Necron list. So from the Purge the Enemy options, all of them are highly situational, but the chances are you can do one of them once you've seen your opponent's list. So I can't really choose from that category, to be honest with you. It's either going to be Assassination or Bring It Down, isn't it? All dependent on your opponent's list. Now as for No Mercy, No Respite, I'm still sticking with Treasure of Aeons for me. It's still a great pick. Even if you're just holding 2 objectives all game, that's still going to max out your 15 victory points. So that means it's going to give you a bit more flexibility if you don't manage to hold 3 in a single turn. From the Warpcraft list, you've only got the one option of course, and you can link that with Assassination. That's Abba the Witch. And as for Battlefield Supremacy, I like the idea behind enemy lines now. There's less restrictions, and you can pair it up with the new R&D, which is now RBD, and you can do all of that for fairly cheap. And speaking of RBD, that's probably what I would pick for shadow operations. I think it works really well with cheap units behind enemy lines and with your primaries. I think it all kind of synergizes quite nicely. Now, of course, all of this is list dependent, and not just your list, your opponent's list too. Even the mission itself comes into play too, but putting these factors aside, I think I like the look of the combination of Treasures of Aeons, behind enemy lines and RBD. Now, I personally play the Nihilak dynasty, so there's lots of ways to still score. Now, I've recently in fact done a 1k list on the channel, so check that out if you haven't already. That's likely the 3 options that I would put for that list. So yeah, check that video out and let me know how you think that list will get on. So guys, that is the end of the video, unfortunately. If you've got any suggestions to score these secondary objectives, pop them down in the comments down below. Let's get a discussion about how you are scoring with your set Necron dynasty. Other than that, you know what I'm going to say next. All that is left to say is thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.